just like to bring in some of my music education and training colleagues, which we call the MEET group, all sorts of reasons. So, and I'm interested in Don's perspective on this idea that you say there's a vertical curriculum essentially in the undergraduate years, and then no curriculum, the absence of curriculum. And I wonder whether, Don, from a learning and teaching perspective, you might like to comment on either the use of a vertical curriculum and or the absence thereof. Maybe this is something we could be looking at, the absence of a curriculum.
Yeah. From what you described about the undergraduate program that you were referring to earlier, in a sense that seems to me to be a curriculum-less context, and a very attractive context to me. My only reservation about it is the differentiation between students based on year level in terms of assessment standards. From my perspective, that's not a valid distinction because it doesn't take into account the varying standards at which people might enter that process. So it would seem to me that if those sorts of processes are to be assessed, it would be more valid to assess them against standards and criteria that didn't relate to year level per se. So there was one comment. That's a very attractive notion to me. And the other thing that intrigues me about what you were saying with the performance-based doctorate is, I presume there's some kind of balance or some kind of weighting between the actual performance and the defence of that performance in the viva voce. I mean, do the examiners ever actually see the real performance, or do they only ever see the digital artefact that records it?
No, they see the performance as well, but there has to be this artefact. Yes, there's a body of evidence, but yes, it is witnessed. It is in live performance. Yes.
So and that occurs in one big block, or does that occur progressively through the doctoral program?
No, I think there would, from what I can recall, that there was the submission, and then there was the equivalent of what you call a recital concert, the final recital concert, which would be a total program by the artist, two 45-minute sets of performance, which may actually be performance that was already documented in the recordings themselves, but and then the viva would take place immediately after that performance, which was very actually key, and we hold this very central to that performance, is talking to the performer directly after the moment of performance, because it's actually the most illuminating, we found. So yes, it is both through artefact and through direct observance of the performance itself. But stress that other point that the viva and any accompanying written materials are there to support or to encourage discussion and debate, or to provide a basis for challenge to the performer about their intent of performance. So there's no real sort of separation of assessment for those components. They're all aids to one thing, which was to make a determination of the outcome of the total thing.
As an individual, that's a very attractive proposition to me. As an administrator of learning and teaching in the university context, I'm already developing a rash. It's to imagine how we could argue in our context for this to be acceptable as a doctoral qualification or as a measure of a set of doctoral activities. I don't know even where I would begin, other than to trot out numerous examples from overseas, therefore it must be better, in the Australian psyche anyway. But a fabulous notion.
I'd say also, again, because I think it's fairly typical, this same approach also drove our understanding of the development of a master's bioresearch. It had the same principle to it. There was a particular master's program I was involved in developing, which was around a master's in jazz improvisation. And this very notion of students creating their own language at master's level, coming in, giving a performance and making a defence of it, it was very challenging educational work to do. But of course we have in the UK an incredibly robust and overbearing system of external examining. And so this isn't just two people who get it in a room looking at a student. This is, you have independent people who are not party to this educational model coming in and looking whether in a sense the criteria are being established between the panel and the student being assessed, but being observed by an individual to look at the quality of that debate and defence. So we were always confident, as open-ended as this approach might be, that it was always validated by external observation, and you don't have that same system here in Australia. Now, we think it's terribly overburdened in the UK because we don't like the fact that there's always people coming in looking over your shoulder effectively, but it provides that reassurance when you're undertaking innovative curriculum developments such as this.
Anything how?
To a certain extent, to a certain level, I do not understand these discussions about minutes of performance and amounts of words, because it's not an assessment of a performance, it's an assessment of research. As a doctoral degree is a research degree, at least in Europe. That is why we decided a few years ago not to take over the DMA, the United States DMA, because that is not a research degree, that is a performance degree. That's what they say themselves about. And I think there it must be quite difficult to say how to judge doctoral work in a performance. But if you start from the idea, we take on board a doctoral student, at the moment he or she can explain that he or she wants to research through practice, for example, the knowledge generated by artists, and to contribute to that knowledge generated by artists, then we discuss individually what the end product might be, and we do that for the first time at the entrance, but after 1 year or the second, we rediscuss and we say, okay, you would like to give 3 concerts and to write the thesis, and you maybe 1 concert and a thesis. We do not discuss the amount of words. We say the quality of the research will be assessed. And if you think you need this or that, you need, our first candidate will play 3 concerts. 1 chamber music concert, 1 solo, and 1 with combination music and dance. He needs it. We will organize. He will play. He has a thesis. It's 900 pages. It's 600 pages too much, or maybe 700 pages. But it's there because he needed it. It took him 6 years. It's too much, we know, but another will be able to write a thesis in, let's say, 150 pages, 1 concert, and the whole research idea is transferred to that. So I think instead of focusing on the end product, let's focus on the quality of the research itself. And therefore, that is, I think, the next challenge for all of us, and all of us not only here in the room, but all our colleagues outside, that is the quality. And what we need for quality is context. We have to compare our products, our local product, to what is in the market. And to have a context, we need a network, because we are even not aware of what is going on in the institutions very near to us and quite far. That's why we are here, to learn more about what's going on in the world of artistic research.
Well, I'll try to link a few things together that's been said. I like the juxtaposition of what we do in doctorates and what we accept and don't accept as research. I think that's very close together, because the doctorate is like research in slow motion. You slowly build up a thing that you would expect a mature researcher to do in a shorter process. I think what you were mentioning, the creative research environments, is very essential. What Jonty is saying about the UK is true, that they were very forward-looking, accepting artistic practice as research. I think they also have something which our Belgian colleagues would call the wet van de reddende voorsprong, which is loosely translated the law of getting behind by being ahead. The Brits were the first people to have street lighting. They had gas lanterns all over London, and they were the first to do that. When electric lights came in, however, they were one of the last to implement that because they had this bloody gas lantern system there. I wouldn't dare to suggest that anything like this happened in artistic practice research, but what I am noticing going to the UK, that the thinking about the rigor behind the rigor behind what is being presented is sometimes lacking. And actually that's where I think your insistence on that rigor is something which is very strong, and it's also through the Research Quality Framework and then Excellent Research Australia, our research assessment exercises, discussions, we've gone through that whole process. So is it true that as soon as somebody opens their violin case, that research starts and whatever comes out is wonderful research and should be funded? Or do we want to have additional evidence that's there? I think the peer review that has been a very strong part of the UK is certainly part of that. But are the peer reviews sufficiently focused on the research component, or they were easily very swayed by someone who actually makes beautiful music with a very limited research component? Because it's quite possible to play music beautifully, but not contribute particularly to research because you're playing Chopin like everybody else is playing it, but really quite beautifully. That has a very low research component, while something which may sound quite horrible, I've mentioned the example of using the 64 microtones of Indian music to create a new type of composition with 64 notes to the octave, which would probably yield music which is quite impossible to listen to, but it might be intellectually incredibly illuminating in how quarter notes relate within the context. So I can compose something which nobody wants to listen to, which would be fabulous research output, or I can play something absolutely beautiful which sounds pretty standard, these two things. Actually, most of my own sitar practice is very much within the standard, and I would usually not put that forward as a research output. It's my professional practice. I play ragas like my teachers were playing them, just a little bit less good than they are. So I think that what is really interesting, and it gets more interesting the closer we get to the actual performance, is how do we combine performance and academic rigor. Also, going back to Don, who has to explain, to defend where the academic rigor is. So why are we giving these people a doctorate exactly? And what we've been trying to do within the Doctor of Musical Arts, in which some of you are enrolled, is to indeed avoid anything that has quantity in it. So somehow, while the academic committee was sleeping, we managed to get a plan passed which has no number of words. So it said it can be a combination of artistic product and explanation of it, and we refused. Actually, did come back several times, and we said no, we actually don't want to quantify the number of words. So theoretically, if someone comes up with the perfect telephone ringtone, which is one of the shortest compositions you can make, without any explanation, and we hear it and think, yes, that's it, we'll give them a PhD.
Here's a challenge for you. We had a bit of a discussion yesterday about art being art and research being research, and why mess with the art. Would you guys just like to perhaps reiterate those comments that you made yesterday, and something that I think you and I have discussed before about? That's art. Let's leave it alone.
Yeah, and that's why the term, as you use it in here, practice as research, you have, historically we had music as art. There are several books. Julian Johnson wrote a book, chapter Music as Art. It was a struggle to integrate music and the art context that needed a work concept and all the things you know. But musical practice as research is I think, a new opportunity. And there are ways to consider musical practice as of course, there's a research component. I think in every human behavior, there's a kind of search and maybe some research component. And if you look very closely, you will find it. But I think we tend to see it, research, as an opportunity, as a concept that has certain characteristics, and that gives new opportunities to musical practice. And so, if indeed in the case on this continuum where you have that one is very much related to thoughts and concepts and theory, and the other where you could say that research is embodied within the results in the artwork itself, there within this continuum, that there has to be always that even in this extreme position that the artwork contains the research, yes, then is it art as research, then that has another function. It is looked at, assessed in another way, as you pointed out. And I think within this context also, coming back to the general theme of learning and educating in the third cycle, we have quite different experience on third cycles, where doctoral students that go on and go on and go on with their question and are really demanding for a context. And I'm glad to hear York University is in fact one of our senior research fellows, William Brooks, is full professor in York University, and we know the system also quite well. And apparently, especially indeed, I think in performance, they were looking also for certain problems there, and therefore he's now part of our research center also to try, because apparently they also, especially in performance, experience some problems there for students that need context, especially if you see the musical practice as research.
Thanks. One of the things I think that Don has raised is to do with that whole signing off on assessing. Can you have a doctorate for this? And I know that when we look at the proposals as they come in, we look at, is this person capable of doing this project? And are they capable of articulating that or disseminating it as kind of central ideas? And it seems to me that's one of the things that's coming out in terms of assessment of the defence and the Viva, that it's not necessarily what you're doing, but are you capable of doing it, and can you communicate the fact that you're capable of it to others, therefore showing that you've learned in this process, you actually have gone through what we call research training, research training scheme, you've learned how to do it, now fly be free, go and do it on other projects and do postdocs and become research fellows and the like. It seems to me that's one of the things about learning and teaching that we focus on is, can you actually do research regardless of the domain? I'd like now, the idea was we'd open up the floor at about 5, so we're doing well. It'd be really good to hear a couple of things that I'd like to stimulate. One is this idea of the DVD, which we know is a replication of the performance, and I'd like to just bring Matt and Paul into that discussion about, is DVD good enough, or is DVD something else, or do we have to have people there to assess live performance? So that's one issue I'd like to raise. Then I'd like to hear some student perspectives on what their take is on learning and teaching, the research process for them, whether the culture is working in terms of how the research centre supports what you do, whether the supervisors support what you do, whether you feel that perhaps you start in year 1 and if you're lucky you'll get some support by the time you get to graduation. And I asked this question because I had a student from another faculty, I might add, in my office the other day, and he said, well, I'm really pleased that I'm getting some help from you because I came in with the assumption that I wouldn't and that I would just stumble through my degree, and if I got some help from you that would be a bonus. So that would be interesting to hear, so perhaps the candidates could start to think about that. In the meantime, if we could pick up on this idea of the digital work as being either central to or an adjunct, perhaps Matt, you've got something to offer.
Yes, I see the DVD as evidence or proof that something happened. We had someone who was here who's just graduated, Jean Penny, who had a really complex thing with flute and electronics and surround sound that really wasn't able to be replicated on any digital medium other than this is evidence of the event that happened, but you had to be there to experience what was actually going on. In some cases, it may be enough in terms of a DVD or a recording to get an understanding of that moment in time and to revisit that moment in time. But it's still not the performance. And on that note, I'd like to actually defer to Paul because he's got some very long-standing views on the digital object not being the music itself, not being the performance itself.
Well, our colleagues in film are well past this because the film's a submission and that's that. And our other colleagues in art and design have another set of stuff. But I guess the basic thing is probably what you guys said. It's really got to do with the design and the argument at the front. And I think personally, in our European culture, I think probably we would do a lot better at, say, confirmation stage where these things are put up. That actually relates to the design, that relates to the argument. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. Someone came to that out in confirmation I wasn't part of, and there's a proposal put up that sounds a little similar from what we were talking about. Something like 50,000 words, that would be 50% of the research. There'll be 2 performances, that would be 30% of the research, 50% each. And then there will be a third component that's 20% video. And I went, oh, that's interesting. And so how are you, I didn't know this particular person, Tom, how are you going to do this and how are you going to do that and talking about it? I said, so what's the 20% video? How does that fit into research? Oh, it's video. So yeah, I'm kind of curious how it's a research component. What part of the research is it contribute to? Oh, it's a video. It's got videos on this. Yeah, but, and we just sort of went around this, you see. And so what we've got, my impression was a traditional confirmation process where we've just gone to the paper, done the usual thing, introduction, methodology, wrap up, PowerPoint, and all those very nice. And what we haven't really looked at is the overall design in terms of all these other things we're talking about. I mean, it's kind of understandable because this is very new and we're trying to matrix these products or methodologies or components together. So again, while we're talking, at the other extreme, I can imagine doing a doctorate and making a commercial record and doing an exegesis in that, but the record would be assessed by the industry because I'm making a virtual artwork, so I'm completely comfortable with that. But then I've never seen a doctoral proposal that proposes that.
But in that
or proposes an interactive DVD, say, of the level and depth of Stephen Nemerson's Around Rondo, because it would probably kill them. But, so in that product, for instance, you know, it's a wonderful product, and I can, you know, in converse to that, we have a lot of problem having that quantified as research. They wanted to put it up as this is in the era processes, as some kind of digital object or some kind of other thing or some kind of artwork, and we're saying, no, that's the research, it's interactive, it's a book, it just happens to be digital. It's an interactive book, and I think our final submission was still some kind of creative book. Eventually got it as a book.
I think so.
It was problematic though, moving around that.
We put it in as a book. Good, we'll see what they say about that.
Yeah, we did. We had quite a bit of touring and throwing. They wanted it, because it was digital, this is like 2009.
Yeah.
Because it was digital, it was some kind of
curatorship
other thing. And we're going, no, it's a modern book, it's interactive. So we just don't have enough variance on it yet. And I'll just return to what you were saying. I think it's all about design, and we need to pay a lot of attention to the design up front in the relationships with the supervisors and through the submission.
Justification of that design. So the answer from the candidate isn't, I don't know, but I'll find out, and this is often the way it sort of shapes up. Well, it just is. Well, no, part of the justification is where does it fit in, how does it fit in, why is this research?
Yeah. Again, I think this is a wrong discussion about video or live performance, for example. Again, if you, from the moment you see the performance, from the moment you see it as a research assessment and not as a performance assessment, which does not exclude that there is a high artistic quality needed during the performance to transmit the research, certain research questions. But from the moment you accept that it is about research, the way you are transmitting it is just a modus operandi. It has to be individually modeled. So from the moment we accept this, there are lots of problems out of the table. I mean, then you talk about what is the best way to transmit, to communicate your research. And again, you say we are still talking, even today, around what about just playing, and you said it very, very eloquently, with the ringtone, the shortest, avoiding as if verbalizing would be something to be avoided by us artists. So thinking or playing does not prevent me of thinking. I would even say in the other way, not thinking would prevent me playing. So why are we scared about communicating? And I would say about the ringtone, if I'm able not to verbalize one word and not to play one note and to get my PhD, I would do it. That would, for me, be the real thing to do. That's instead of why we artists, we play the game universities are awaiting. Because they want only to play. No. It's a combination, and it's about the research question, about the quality of the research question and the research performed. After all, it's a research qualification. It means after 3 or 4 years, you get a label, you are able to do research. That's the only thing. And if we think we can just play and bring it to the public or the assessor should say, you are a wonderful player, a wonderful artist, but what's the research? So I think I'm waiting for the moment that these discussions should stop about well, I'm a little bit experienced.
One way of stopping that, and this is something that we're finding, is that a lot of great musicians, great performers here say, well, why don't I have a doctorate? Look and hear me play. And a lot of the great students coming in, they say, I don't want to do new things, I just want to play Chopin really, really well. And we had some pretty hefty discussions with some of our senior staff whether we shouldn't offer doctoral degrees, particularly Asian students. It's also a big market. Asian students want to come in, get a doctorate, because you need a doctorate to work in the Asian market. And give it to me because I play standard repertoire piano really well. And we basically keep saying no, we're quite happy to invent a new degree, which is the diploma of heavenly musicianship or something like that. Because I don't mind what it's called, but it's not a doctorate because
the artist diploma. There is an artist diploma. There's something good in the United States at the artist diploma.
And that's what
or called advanced studies or whatever. We are creating our own problem because we say first cycle, second cycle, at least in Europe, first, second, and third. As if the third cycle, the doctorate degree, is gives you more artistry than the second and the first, which is not the case. It is actually the first, the second, and then there is a third for 1 or 2 or 3% of those wonderful artists that are also fascinated by some problems or questions, and they want to spend some time with it. And it's not about artistry. They should bring the artistry in, but it's not about artistry. They will develop probably other things, but it is not of the. There should not be a continuum, as in some heads of good artists. I now have my master, I want to get, and then we're creating, as I said, these problems, because we say, if you want to teach at the conservatoire, you need a doctorate. Then I can just give one good example in Europe, that's Sibelius. When we started with our doctorate program, I went to the director of the Sibelius Academy, and I said, because he had already 15 years experience in doctoral degrees, and he explained to me that in the Finnish law, there is foreseen that if his, for example, head of the piano professor is retiring, then he has to look for a new one, and amongst the criteria there is, and he or she should have a doctorate, or being a great artist, and that is to be judged by the rector. So the rector said to me, it's easy, I'm first looking for the good artist. And if he or she has a doctorate, that's a bonus, just for the law, but not for me. So, and I think we should also we should contextualize the doctoral degree in the whole framework of the educational system, and we should just give it the place it deserves and not more. That is to say, a research qualification. You can be a perfect artist and a perfect professor at the conservatoire without. But of course it is good to have it because we need it as a discipline. We need reflection. We need development through reflection and through questioning. And that always has been the case, I think. Even without doctoral degrees, we had wonderful artists.
questions and comments from the floor, particularly for our international guests. You can pick our brains anytime, and you do. But if you have questions or comments, I'd welcome them. Staff or...
As the supervisor of quite a number of DMAs here who are doing practice-based projects, I'm really interested in how we can better equip those students to develop an appropriate discourse to articulate the research elements of what they're doing. I appreciate the black hole idea, but a lot of my students come to me looking for answers and guidance. Now, I have particular methods and approaches which I've found are useful, but I'm interested in our international guests' advice on what you use to guide that process of finding a way of articulating what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a particular difficult exercise, especially in our system. We have as well early music, contemporary people, contemporary music people, composition and performance, and bring all these people together for 2 days a month, as we do, and giving, and with the goal of equipping them for further in their individual research to help them and to contextualize. That's, I think, extremely difficult, and that's something that we are still developing, amongst other things, through the research center. But the one thing that we, for instance, do our doctoral program looks as follows. We have 10 meetings a year with the whole group, with the 15 students. Each month we have a general theme. That is, we call these are topoid, the prominent elements in musical practice as large, such as listening, analyzing, creativity, and so on, are relate to all these all the students. And within that general theme, we have a module. It's called Research and True Musical Practice, where students can bring their own views on that theme in the program. We have a module called the Philosophy of Science, but science is philosophy module. Also one on aesthetics. We always invite a guest in a colloquium, and we have presentations by the students and by the students themselves. And what is the aim of all of this? It's not to make them philosophers, not to make them something else as they are, but for instance, working with primary texts or source texts and discussing them, it's getting away into how you can coherently develop ideas. And at the same time, we chose these things so that it's not also about how people develop a certain logic, but also that the content of these source texts can be of help for them articulating or relating to these elements. And so they are 2 years, so 20 sessions with us within their curriculum, and we are not always successful in this kind of thing, but it's an exercise of defending your own point of view within the research and true musical practice module. Making a point. We ask them on beforehand, can you make your point and defend it to the group? Can you present your own work, and can you accept feedback and work with them? So that's a very practical way of doing. Can you understand another text, another point of view, as in the philosophy of science, or can you contextualize your method that you use within a broader context? Can you do that? And can you understand other things? I think these are transferable skills in a way. That's the word that's often used. That in a very practical way, without saying, oh, we do now the transferable skill this and so on. I think by doing this kind of things, people open up in a way, start to reflect on their own practice, use, in best of cases, use this material that is brought to them within their own development of their research, and that's the way we try to develop, and we want to make this stronger with the help of a research center that has a postdoc experience within it, and that can kind of refer to that. But that's a huge challenge, and as maybe it's something else. The doctoral program is in collaboration also. Every student has a supervising team. So for the individual research supervision, there's a supervising team of a promoter and mostly two tutors. So the doctoral curriculum has a kind of develops general skills in research, and then you have a specialized element within the supervising team. And this balance, I think, is something that looks good for the future, but still needs a lot of work as well at the supervising level, at the curriculum level.
Maybe I should also add that we look for a balance between what the student is bringing to the research environment and what he or she can take home. So the average age of our doctor students is, let's say, around between 30 and 35. So they are very good artists, experienced artists. For example, the monthly theme of notation. If you bring a sample composer next to a Gregorian chant singer, probably it will be the first time in their life that they meet and that they speak to each other. And when it's about notation, the Gregorian chant singer will, and that's what we ask to them, you should bring next month your view on to what an extent notation in your research project takes what the role is that notation plays in your research trajectory. And so we'll do the sample composer, and we know from beforehand that you cannot say I do not relate to notation, I do not relate to analysis, I do not relate to listening. That's impossible. So they will have to be inventive to bring that on the table. We are sure that both of them will leave and will have been influenced by each other, and that it will be probably, as I said, the first time that they were confronted with notation and how a completely other musician and a completely other style of drum thinks about it. And that probably might influence both. And that is this balance between what they bring and what they bring to the table and what they take home. And that is the idea of a research environment. So everything is in function for us. When we organize something, it's in function of the research environment for artists. So we invite them, as you said, we have the rhythm or the research in the musical practice module, but all the other guest professors or presentations are related to that monthly theme. So in 2 days, you focus on one phenomenon that surely is related one way or another to your own artistic life and probably also on your research life.
Jonty, did you have a response to Rose?
Well, in a sense, there's nothing more to say. I think you've actually summarised exactly the approach that I would advocate, which is through a research forum, which actually should be right at something that should be part of the experience right at the very beginning. This capacity for performers, artists, composers to start to actually engage in discussion, debate, dialogue with ideas. And we tend to have a structured forum where you would inject certain questions to the group, for the group to consider, to contemplate and answer, and to insist on a response from all. Because once you get over that psychological hurdle of participation, the brain starts to engage with the fact that there are questions and that you have valid responses to those questions. That's often part of the problem I find with research students, is their own inhibition about having an idea and the capacity to express it. So I think it's drawing out that innate potential in all of us, but that we sort of block. And I think as soon as you can get that out through whether it's a structured or an informal colloquium or a forum, is the best thing, because it actually gets the students performing. That's the important thing. It might not be in a way that they're used to, but it gets them engaging in that way. And I've found that very quickly breaks down barriers. There are always one or two cases, and it tends to be the more mature professional musician who is steeped in their practice and is not particularly reflecting on that practice, who finds this the most difficult thing to do. I've had a couple of cases, where the student's gone all the way through a program, and the idea of having to perform a presentation has actually been debilitating for that student. But generally, through that colloquial approach, even the most stubborn cases find a voice. And I think that's one of the important skills, probably almost the most important skill to bring out, is that capacity for them to find that voice and to articulate who they are, because that's eventually how they substantiate and defend themselves in the assessment.
And beyond.
Yeah. Well, and in life.
Yeah, the queries.
I take on board everything you're saying. I think it's a wonderful discussion that we're having. But we're talking all the time about oral defence, and I find, as an artist myself, I find artists are very able to vocally speak about what they do and defend what they do and have arguments, and they've always got an opinion. But when it comes to the actual writing, and in this environment that we're in, we do have to write thesis. My worry is that we don't give our students at undergraduate level the opportunity to learn to write. And so what happens is they come in at some RHD level and find that they can go to colloquium and they can speak about what they do and they can argue their position, and that they can actually get up and perform, because they wouldn't be in an institution like this if they weren't, you know, good performers. But when it comes to the writing, it's a real problem, because they cannot clearly express themselves in the writing the way they can orally, because they're in an art form that, you know, we're in a form of communication that is out there. Not only can they not do that, but they then have to fit into, in a normal writing way, they then have to fit into an academic model of writing, which most of them have no background for at all. So they struggle in that first couple of years, and because we only do have the supervision, if you've got good supervisors, they just keep nursing you through, and, you know, and having been a supervisor myself, doing a lot of rewriting for students, and hoping that not that we write it for them, but that they will learn from the rewriting model. But, you know, so my concern is that we should start teaching people how to research and how to write at undergraduate level, so that they can then decide whether this is really what they're capable of doing.
Yeah. I think Paul and I have often discussed this idea of the course called Getting the Buggers to Write, which needs to be... It is a time but it needs to be, and it probably needs to happen at all those different levels, because we kind of expect students to come through the undergraduate program and then turn right and go at honours, now write something.
And research something.
Yeah, and that's a challenge to make it.
It's something we shouldn't underestimate. My opinion is this is very embedded in local situation.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, our context.
Wherever white middle class Brisbane come from,
but I think
literacy
Australia
standards are extraordinary.
That's
also an issue.
Sorry, what's that question? Yeah. I'd just say research training in the context I'm working in, the background I've come, has always been embedded in undergraduate training. Because the principle is, in the UK, in order to gain an honours degree, and of course honours is a fourth optional year in Australia, is that it has to have a research component. That's what defines honours in the British context. And again, I don't want to sort of dwell on my experience at Melbourne, but the whole basis of the Melbourne model, with shifting to a graduate-focused education, took care of the idea that research training had to be embedded in the first 3 years of the undergraduate training, because the model was based on the fact that students would go into graduate school as an essential part of their education, and that this wasn't something you just discovered in the final 2 years of this phase. This is something that starts in your undergraduate education. So, in my experience, the first thing you do at undergraduate level is, as well as all the things you do with putting performers to perform, and oral training and all of the other theoretical skills that you're developing and analytical skills, is that you develop their capacity to write and articulate almost from the word go. I mean, that's my experience, is that you would actually, the first thing you do is set up undergraduate student is a piece of work for them to explore an idea in written terms. That is the beginning of their research training.
This is also the very area that has driven a great deal of attack on Melbourne because, and actually from a lot of people here too, about the fact that the curriculum had lost 20% of the music curriculum.
Yeah.
And I agree with Glyn too about the generalising argument. It's interesting the way that's perceived is watering down the curriculum to do core skills in non-disciplinary.
Can I complicate, because I think your question is wonderful, can I complicate the discussion a little bit more? We talk about articulating research and assume that writing is the only way of articulating research, which is actually completely in contrast or contradictory to the very discussion we're having, where we say you can articulate research through music. You can also articulate research through speaking. And as you say, there's an incredibly strange disconnect between musicians speaking, because most of them are very, very eloquent, and then you say, that's a great idea, put it on paper. And you get something on paper, what? Somebody else wrote this is not you. So the block that comes, and particularly when there's the fear, I have to write academically, so it has to be boring and uninteresting. Yeah. So the people at the say, can you please write how you told me in the first place? Forget anything. We'll work through the academic credibility of your text afterwards. And it even becomes more important when we deal with indigenous researchers. We have close to zero full indigenous. We've got 4 indigenous students enrolled in the whole COM.
4 self-identified.
In 750 students, and most of those are indigenous students that have been very much weaned in the Anglo-Saxon model. So we didn't know about most of them when we heard this. So the people that come from indigenous knowledge systems, which we now acknowledge to be very profound knowledge systems, will not get through the conservatorium because they're asked to write in a style which doesn't make any sense for the way they've been learning. I've met fabulously intelligent, research-active indigenous people who speak about their research and speak about it more eloquently in more interesting metaphors than many of the researchers that we read all the time. So I'm not convinced that all the submissions, even if they have to have words, if words are needed, have to have written words because written words are not the only form.
That's what I'm saying.
No, but it's also. But I think it's a model that we can challenge very easily, and I think we're in a very good position to challenge it at this very moment.
But your question just goes to the pragmatics of the situation you find yourself in, and we were talking over lunch about the issue of submitting research at the highest level for assessment by our various bodies. We have to articulate, and this is actually even more of a challenge, in 250 words. We have to encapsulate the essence of the research embedded in the practical work. That requires a great skill. It isn't a simple task, actually. It's extremely hard to do.
I think this variety, written and oral presentation of the work, I think that this variety is exciting, but I come back to what Peter said, that the research is at the center. And I think it would also be not good to deny musicians the possibility to write. And, and if they didn't have the opportunity on beforehand, I think if they didn't have the opportunity on beforehand and they are not stimulated to do a certain thing, they will not do it, of course. But I think undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral level, I think that the possibility should be offered for them to do certain things in written form, and we don't deal with bachelor and masters, but I think within the doctoral curriculum there are 4 elements that contribute to that we try to install for this element of seeing if this would be an appropriate way for an artist researcher to present certain things at the research proposal that has a written component that can be judged if somebody is able to do that kind of thing. The first year we now implement a system where first year students have to write a book review or something else to do this kind of thing. We also have within the doctoral program a module that I didn't mention for the first years. It's called presentation and information training, where we do both things. We have workshops there on writing skills, and we also invite guests that come from other disciplines but that can illuminate certain things or contextualize the element of writing. And of course there's a supervision also, as you say, the individual supervisor that can do certain things. And relating to oral and written presentation, I think of course there's a huge difference between writing something and orally defending something, and that this transformation I think is interesting. If you read Walter Ong's Orality and Literacy book, where he makes this about oral and literary cultures, for instance, I think this transformation, as I experienced because I'm a musician and went through this phase, it's indeed very different to write, but I think it brings also something new to it, and it's not the same.
Thank you.
Yes, something that Paul said in response to the idea of writing skills and local literacy levels being a localised phenomenon, and that's often where the discussion ends, in terms of we identify it in this locality. And I'm wondering, how can we move it forward from there?
I was wondering about Dom's experience with the writing, relative to the writing in undergraduate courses, because we have spent a lot of time in the first cycle about allowing students to express themselves in all kinds of ways. And both of you guys have done a lot of work with art and text. The idea being, if you follow the digital native discussion, which I haven't seen any evidence of, but we got a lot of press, you know, having multiple platforms to express yourself in different ways. They're supposed to be digital natives, and they've got frames and MPEGs. And we have played with that.
Yeah, I think there are instances in our institution where a very wide range of modes of expression are used. For example, in our popular music program, our incoming students are notoriously illiterate in terms of written stuff. You've only got to look at their application documents to realise there's going to be a challenge here. The third week into their program, they're actually required to submit in writing a plan for their creative work, which is self-directed, self-determined, for the semester. And if you get people to write about themselves, about what it is that they're intending to do, that's a very strong motivator. And so, whilst the standard of execution of the writing may not be fabulous, at least it's something with which they're engaged.
Yeah.
But also, it's not. I don't think it's a binary. I don't think it's either written, on paper, or oral. There's a whole sort of rich media. I mean, you spoke to us eloquently with visual support, and those kinds of things are all should be made available at some point in every semester of every student's experience at tertiary level, in my view. The whole range of stuff should be engaged with, not at the expense of performance or at the expense of research training, but just to provide our students with the richest possible experience whilst they're under our influence, because that way everybody will leave successful. Whereas if we're overly focused on any one narrow thing, we're condemning our students to be overwhelmingly failures.
So are you suggesting that that framework will reconcile the difficulties that Irene brought up?
It will contribute to a solution, because it's the motivation, what it is that people are writing about, the importance of it. It needs to be meaningful if you're going to try and motivate students. So, generally speaking, with creative people, the most meaningful thing is their creative act. So if they're obliged to describe that in writing in a meaningful way, similar to one of the expressions of the professional development journal that's standard in our BMOs. I mean, if that was actually embraced wholeheartedly,
Thank you.
that would actually elevate the standard of writing, rather than being something that students can engage with in a very cursory fashion, not get any marks for it, therefore why should they do it?
Exactly.
Well, I have a problem with that, because in our assessment culture, if it doesn't earn marks, it's not worth doing.
Just one thing that I just pick up on that, both in the Arctic and in our doctoral program, it was mentioned a few times, we talk a lot about portfolios and university environment. Australia talks a lot about portfolios and e-portfolios, but I guess that's where I was sort of going there about the idea. I haven't really seen examples of that. All I've seen in doctoral work so far is big theses, and I haven't seen any of that. So, and then we've tried to encourage us in the undergraduate areas to develop an individual voice, I think is what we're talking about, not necessarily expressed only through text, but through a variety of different artefacts. The main thing is they're engaging with the world around them, or their
I think
subjects.
these sorts of discussions are fantastic in terms of what's possible. But, we, as teachers, we're dealing with what's happening right now. And I think we have to do this, and hopefully things will move much faster than I know they actually do in academia. The deal is that the university says that we have to meet certain, even though we're a conservatorium, we have to meet certain levels of benchmark to be given a degree. And my worry is that we're not preparing our students, because in this country, like in Europe, if you need to get a higher degree these days to get a job. So students think they can just motor through. They've got a bachelor's degree. That's the prerequisite for them to go doing an RHD. It's not really.
If I had to bring in my students' literacy standards as part of my assessment, I would have to fail all of them.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But what are the doctor students?
No, undergraduate.
Because we should also realize that for most PhD students in the university-based traditional sciences, the writing up period is a real nightmare. And so why not for us, I would say? I mean, why should we think? We get these students, I'm a musician, I'm not supposed to write. But the writing up of something is another way of reflecting on it. And it is a thinking process. And I would say first of all, I would say maybe 1 or 2 or 3% of our students are going for a PhD. So maybe we should not make out of all of them great authors. They should be fine musicians. And those who want to go for a doctoral degree, as Jos said, we ask them to put on paper, and I know that is tricky, but we ask them to put on paper in a dossier what they would like to do in a framework of 2,000 words, and we judge. I fully realize that we miss them, those wonderful, fine researchers that are not yet capable in writing to, that is true. So we have to work on that, and we have the same problem in our country. So now at the bachelor and master level in the conservatoires, they are working, and we in Docastes, we have to take into account the level of the end level of the masters, and we work further on that. The higher their level is, the higher we can start, I would say. But it is true. But we should contextualize again. Not everyone will be a brilliant author. It's about research. It's about making your point. And if you can make your point without words and without music, it's fine. If you can make it, I will not repeat.
There's 2 more questions and we'll close. Jocelyn.
I'm interested to know if your programs are conducted in English and the outcomes in English, how do you assess the students coming in if they're coming in from other language backgrounds? How do you assess the language?
We accept dossiers in Dutch, in German, in French, in English, and Australian. And in Latin. And we accept 4 languages. Yeah.
But the courses or the curriculum is in English.
Yeah.
It's English program.
Yes. And the outcome?
The outcome can be in language.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be wonderful if we had that possibility here?
So the question is not how many words, but
how many languages.
Jane, a question?
Actually, I didn't have a question. So if someone has a question, then I would
reserve. A comment is equally okay.
I'm sorry?
A comment is equally okay.
Oh, okay. Well, it was sort of following up on some of the things that we were talking about, and in terms of the word research, and speaking as a performer, composer, educator who is very excited to be here and hear what you do, because basically you're preaching to the choir in my case. I like to think of myself as a spy and a journalist and a storyteller and an observer and an interviewer, and to think of my approach to teaching or to performing or any of the things that I do, which are all the same. I approach writing the way I would approach performing, or the way I would approach teaching, or the way I would approach composing, which is to always find maybe the game, or the question, or I guess the question more than anything. And so I guess to inspire students to read or to write, there's so many different ways to write. There's so many different approaches. There's so many different puzzles. And students, I find, learn so well from each other that there's so many different ways you can seduce them and yourself and others to listen and to write and to live their imagination. So I guess that's kind of what I'm so excited about, because I think, you know, the big word here is research. But underneath that, the umbrellas, the things that are underneath all of that, are so many different pathways that you're allowing to give. And I think it really does start actually well before undergraduate work. But it starts with everything that we do, I think. I think it starts with us looking at ourselves as researchers, journalists, interviewers, spies, and allowing everybody, the audience that we're performing with and for, as well as the students, as well as our colleagues, to find all of these pathways. So it was just a comment, I guess, about the different ways to write and the approaches to thinking about that, and to thank you. So.
I'd like to follow on and thank Paul and Hal. Did you have something?
Oh, no,
sorry,
smash
you
maybe a question because we're only 3 minutes
I
was just picking up on you saying reflection was basically the final point you got to there, when let's reflect on all these various interweaving factors that are our practice. At what point does that reflection, is it already what we do anyway as artists or whatever? And at what point does that become research? What's the critical element? I think that question is still so big, which is why I didn't want to ask it with 2 minutes to go. But it's sort of, and because it is the crucial component, and I like how you're talking about fitting the form to the content. So the content is the research question and what you're doing. The really important thing, and then finding what fits the expression of that. But how does the research happen? What's the critical difference between just an ordinary reflection, or is there no difference?
It's actually the question, when inquisitiveness, we hope that every good artist is inquisitive, when inquisitiveness reaches the tipping point to become then, I think, just to be very short, it's about structure, it's about formulating, it's about setting a goal, it's a time frame also, it's entering an environment where others are thinking in the same way, or it is.
Maybe what you pointed to was to a kind of an ontological identity of what is it, and that's something that we struggled with for a long time. And you can ask this for everything. What is art? But maybe another thing is, what can it do? What can it bring? And what can it produce? And how can it contribute? And as it is a contribution and such. And I think it can also be considered as a practice, as something that people do with a shared implicit and some explicit understanding, but not a real definition when this point is reached. I think it's a human practice in a way that we have to develop by doing the kind of thing that we do today, for instance, or by communicating about it, by having certain standards, shared understandings that are difficult to make explicit, but that are anyhow shared. But there's a process, I think, that we all contribute.
I think it's simply when you're compelled to make a response to something and to share that response with others. I think that's essentially what research is about.
What a very good way to finish. I'm pleased you asked that question. Would you thank Paul and Hal from our local community, and also Peter and Jonty. have obviously recorded today, and we wanted to transcribe some of that to bring together our thoughts, and then we'll be able to sort of analysis and reflect, and then we'll actually ask Liam to do that. And then you'll be able to answer your own question.
YouTube later this evening.
Yeah, YouTube with him.
That's tomorrow morning.
Friday next week. What's happening next week?
Well, to those who are regularly involved in the RHT colloquium, we've had a mega year of fabulous activities and discussions, but musicians do it best over a glass of wine. So next week we're going to migrate over to Cafe San Marco, where you're going to have an opportunity to talk about the burning issues that have arisen for you in the colloquium. So we hope to see you there. Everyone's most welcome.
Thank you. And thank you, guys, for all your work this year and putting together. Like, it's been a fabulous year.